Whenever you see a short video clip going viral on Twitter, you always got to be at least a little careful not to react conclusively. Clips are intentionally cut short. They're often edited to show this, but not that. They're produced to get exactly that sort of viral reaction, not necessarily to present the truth. So when I saw Twitter on fire on Thursday with a 2-minute podcast clip of Sam Harris and graphics highlighting a quote of his that he doesn't care about covering up dead kids in Hunter Biden's basement if it keeps Trump from power, I thought maybe this is that. Maybe this is a bit of an unfair presentation. Because after all, one of the things I've admired about Sam Harris in the past is at least his claimed commitment to steel manning an argument, taking it at its strongest, not its cheapest, giving even ideas that you strongly disagree with the fairest consideration possible, because it's only by confronting the strongest points that we defeat an idea completely. Plus, I understand how these long-form conversations go. You start off on one point, you explore it with some analogies, those comparisons get exaggerated for a joke's sake, and then stripped of the broader point, the brief clip can sound ridiculous. So in the spirit of all that, I went to listen to the full episode to see what I was missing, because after all, surely Sam isn't actually asking for a shovel so he can start burying the Biden bodies. There's got to be a broader point or explanation. And there are broader points. It's just that they don't mitigate that point about Biden bodies at all. They actually reinforce it. This one is not a case of the Twitter clip being a misrepresentation. In fact, this may be a rare case where the Twitter clip actually isn't as bad as the full conversation, because at least the Twitter clip you could plausibly write off as some kind of joke, but if you listen to the full conversation, you can't. And by the way, I would recommend a full listen, not just for the context, but because it's a great piece of interview work. The show is called Trigonometry. I wasn't familiar with it until now, but what I admire about the hosts is they clearly disagree with what Sam is saying, or at least they understand the flaws with it, and they push back just enough to make that clear, but no more than necessary just to get Sam talking. They challenge him without obstructing him, and that's an important point because it means nothing Sam says is because of a trap. Nothing Sam says is because of frustration with being challenged or interrupted on every single point. It's just Sam freely walking himself and the hosts and the audience through a line of thinking that goes well beyond just Sam himself. And that's really the important point of listening to this interview. I don't discuss it to own Sam Harris or to try to dunk on him. Despite his stature, even Shaq couldn't dunk on Sam harder than Sam just dunked on himself. This interview is a great demonstration of a mindset that's common well beyond Sam Harris. People in politics, people in media, people in all sorts of positions of power. It's not unique to Sam. Sam is just explaining it. In fact, Sam is getting praise for being a transparent voice for so many. Lots of other people believe exactly what he's saying. It's just few are willing to say it openly. So perhaps Sam deserves an odd form of credit for that. But it is certainly of explanatory value. We often hear it called Trump derangement syndrome, or TDS. But what does that actually mean? Well, as Sam demonstrates, it means to get it morally twisted by substituting opposition to a person for principle. It's when right and wrong aren't objective truths for their own sake, but instead are only relative to whom they are applied. So robbery isn't wrong for its own sake, for example. It just depends on who is robbed. Assault isn't wrong for its own sake. It just depends on who's assaulted. Or in this case, child murder isn't wrong for its own sake. It just depends on who's killing the kids. Now, to be as precise as possible, Sam isn't saying that killing the kids is fine, but he is saying that if it's done in service to stopping something worse, in this case Trump, then it is an acceptable cost. We get to this point by the hosts asking him about his support for banning Trump off Twitter and how he squares that with free speech principles he otherwise claims to hold. And as a related topic, what he thinks about Twitter's suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story before the election. That is the context for the dead kids moment. And notice, the evaluation is not what's right or wrong for its own sake, an evaluation based on principle. Instead, it's an evaluation of who is involved, an evaluation based on people.
Listen, I don't care what's in Hunter Biden's life. I mean, Hunter Biden, at that point, Hunter Biden literally could have had the corpses of children in his basement. I would not have cared. First of all, it's Hunter Biden, right? It's not Joe Biden. But whatever scope of Joe Biden's corruption is, like if we could just go down that rabbit hole endlessly and understand that he's getting kickbacks from Hunter Biden's deals in Ukraine or wherever else, right? It is infinitesimal compared to the corruption we know Trump is involved in. It's like a firefly to the sun.
Well, first of all, we don't know the comparative scale without seeing the information to make that judgment. That's the point of the information flowing freely. Second, Sam Harris's personal evaluation of which is worse doesn't justify the suppression of information to stop someone else from making that same evaluation for himself. But more importantly, the fundamental question here is not which is worse. The fundamental question is what is true. That's the first of Sam's betrayals of principle, that the truth itself is paramount, the highest value for its own sake. Instead, Sam is saying that the truth only has value if it serves to help the people that he likes or to hurt the people that he doesn't. And he rationalizes this thinking by simply declaring the person that he doesn't to be an existential emergency. The whole argument is framed by analogizing Trump to an asteroid. If an apocalyptic asteroid was heading toward Earth, well, surely you'd do everything within your power to stop it, including trashing all the principles you'd otherwise uphold.
If there was an asteroid hurtling toward Earth and we got in a room together with all of our friends and had a conversation about what we could do to deflect its course, right? Is that a conspiracy?
And if that comparison doesn't do it for you, if an asteroid isn't scary enough, well, how about this one? Trump is also Alex Jones.
I think Trump is essentially, we got Alex Jones as president of the United States. Again, it's analogous to having elected Alex Jones president of the United States. Like a smaller problem is to just for some billionaire to buy the New York Times and give it to Alex Jones to run. That's a smaller problem than getting Trump reelected.
So it's just a get out of bullshit free card, apparently. Sure, you may be skeptical of Sam's reasoning, but what if Alex Jones was the alternative? Well, then I'm still going to listen to Alex Jones to evaluate for myself. That's the fundamental flaw in this reasoning. First of all, simply declaring something an Alex Jones asteroid does not make it true. In what way was life under the asteroid 4 years ago worse than life today? The few explanations there may be are reserved for the ivory tower philosopher, not the everyday American paying the economic price to subsidize the brain massages of the elite. But second, even if Trump is an Alex Jones asteroid, no, we don't abandon all moral principle to oppose him, because an approaching asteroid doesn't justify censorship or imprisonment or murder. That's what makes them moral principles. They are the highest values for their own sake. If you abandon them when they apply to people or situations you don't like, then they aren't principles at all because they aren't universal. And instead, there are then different rules for people you like and people you don't. That's the very definition of tyranny. But just like the asteroid declaration, since Sam says he's doing this on behalf of democracy, we're just supposed to take his personal declaration as demonstration of the truth, despite all evidence otherwise. Through this logic that whatever Sam declares the worst is so, and therefore any means to stop whatever Sam declares the worst is justified, Sam talks himself into endorsing actual anti-democratic conspiracies, again, in the name of preserving democracy, of course.
That doesn't answer the people who say it's still completely unfair to not have looked at the laptop in a timely way and to have shut down the New York Post's Twitter account. Like that's just a conspiracy. That's a left-wing conspiracy to deny the presidency to Donald Trump. Absolutely it was. Absolutely. Right. But I think it was warranted.
So once again, the logic devolves to plots to undermine the vote or to undermine the truth or to undermine any fundamental principle aren't necessarily bad. It just depends on who's doing them and why. As long as Sam Harris personally agrees with the conspiracy is fine. But also, Alex Jones is wrong about everything he's ever said about conspiracies. When we hear the term TDS, this is exactly what it means. All analysis is conducted only according to where Trump fits within it. If it helps Trump, then all means of intervention are justified. If it hurts Trump, then all means of promotion are justified. This is either a philosophy or a mental illness that says, but Trump is the highest moral principle of the universe. After the interview's publication, Sam responded to the criticism with some commentary on Twitter that might dispute that characterization. He says in no way did he intend to say Democrats would have been justified in committing fraud or other illegal means to stop a Trump presidency, though he doesn't think that they did. But why not? Because after all, if voter fraud stops an asteroid's impact, then why wouldn't it be justified? If voter fraud stops an Alex Jones presidency, then why wouldn't it be justified? On what principle is censorship justified, or at least meddling with information and the indirect manipulation of votes through those means, but not directly faking the ballots themselves? By what logic are dead kids in the basement an acceptable cost, but voter fraud is not? And besides, the only way to reach that conclusion that voter fraud is not justified is by accepting that there are, in fact, some values higher than stopping Trump, like the truth, like the vote, like the process, like the broad principle of political power rightly belonging to the people and not the sneering but infinitely wise elite. But if you grant the premise that those values are higher, then Sam's thinking about the conspiracy falls apart. The conspiracy would not be justified because it betrays the same, more important values. I'm just trying to understand the completely contradictory logic, but thankfully Sam does offer an explanation later to clarify.
No, Trump is an Alex Jones level figure for me. So
the irony, of course, is that for all of these impassioned declarations that things Sam Harris doesn't like are Jonesian asteroids of certain apocalypse, the only guarantee of it is his proposed solution. His thinking is the actual asteroid. When we evaluate and apply morality, not according to any objective framework, but just according to whether we like the people involved or whether we like the particular outcome, that is exactly how we create a nonsense world of injustice that will surely devolve into apocalyptic chaos. In that scenario, the asteroid might actually be relief. We will welcome the asteroid because it'll ease the suffering. And I know Sam is saying he doesn't actually support burying bodies, and I'll take him at his word that there's some shred of a moral principle he's hanging on to that prevents it. But the point is that following this reasoning that right and wrong aren't objective rules for their own sake and instead depend on to whom they're applied and why, that reasoning is exactly how the bodies do get buried. If you ever wonder how the worst crimes are possibly rationalized, even in the minds of intelligent men, this is how. Oh, this person was a bad guy. Oh, this person was a threat to the greater good. Oh, this person was part of some other and therefore unworthy of the same rules or standards. So how we treat this person is not of moral significance because whatever we do isn't as bad as what this person does anyway. Forget Sam burying the bodies. That's the exact same logic a jihadist would use to decapitate him in a moment's chance, a point of criticism on which Sam has otherwise built his career for years. And to that point, I'm sure Sam would say, yeah, well, I don't support burying bodies in pursuit of my cause, actually. Yeah, great. The question is, why not? And if the answer is because there are moral truths more important than getting my way every single time, correct. Now explain what those are, because once we explore those, we'll find they don't stop at it's wrong to kill people or it's wrong to commit voter fraud in violation of the law. There's something deeper and broader to it. And until we figure those values out, I do worry about the buried bodies. A lot, actually, because there's no logic preventing them. Only a question of whether or not they serve a greater good. And on that point, we don't actually need theory or philosophy to consider the consequences. We have endless historical examples when moral truth is sacrificed for the greater good. We get neither. We get chaos, we get abuse, and yes, we get death because there is no good greater than the moral truth itself. And if the big brains of the world want to propose a higher value otherwise, go ahead. Just please come up with something at least a little more compelling than but Trump. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below and especially over on Minds, that is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.